Let's see. Yes, I can see her over there. Good afternoon, Ulrika. Can you see us? Can you hear us?
I cannot see. I can see and I can hear you, but there is a bit of an echo. No, now it's better.
Now it's better. Let's see. We will bring you up to the main screen so that journalists in the room can actually look at you. It should be coming, I see, in a second or two. Perfect. Excellent. So now we can see you and we could hear you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. And thank you so much. We're pleased to have Ulrika Richardson, our Humanitarian Coordinator in Haiti. So she's here today joining us from Port-au-Prince in Haiti. And she will give you an update, as you can imagine, on the humanitarian situation in the country. Ulrika, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stephanie, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to brief you today on the situation in Haiti. In fact, since we last spoke last year, we have seen the situation go from just really bad to even worse. And we see indiscriminate violence still being, let's say, escalating in the country. We see particularly the capital of Port-au-Prince impacted by armed gang violence, but also the province of Artibonite, a little north of the capital. And in fact, we already saw 2023 as a very steep increase in terms of violence, indiscriminate violence, killings, murders, lynching, rape, and other forms of sexual violence. We saw a steep increase in 2023 as opposed to 2022. And unfortunately, 2024 started even in a similar sort of a very tragic trend, where we had January 2024 being the most violent month since 2 years back. And I think that says a lot. And obviously we have impact of the violence means that that people are being subject to very brutal and grave violations of their human rights. They are being subject to very brutal forms of sexual violence, including collective rape. And we've seen, in fact, a 50% increase in sexual violations as of between 2022 and 2023. Now, of course, these figures in terms of sexual violence, primarily against women and girls, we have to also realize that they probably don't reflect the entire picture, because women and girls and people in general are very afraid of reporting. They're afraid of retaliation because they actually very often need to cohabitate with gangs as they live. We see obviously a very steep increase in people that flee their homes. They have to abandon everything and basically either sleep on the street, be hosted by host communities, which already have very scarce resources, as we can imagine, but also be, let's say, camping out in schools, for example, right? So we have now 314,000 displaced people in Haiti, which is quite a stark number. And so what we also have assessed is that more or less 5.5 million Haitians are in need of humanitarian assistance. And that's quite significant if we consider that the country has between 11, 12 million in terms of population. And we know that out of those, there are 4.4 million people and that's about 40% of the population, that actually face acute food insecurity. And we also know that 45% of Haitians don't have access to clean drinking water. So this, of course, this really puts a huge pressure on the population and the most vulnerable. Life is at risk as you step out of your house, even perhaps in your house. If you live in some of the most affected areas, really, you can be in harm's way, either stray bullets or particularly being targeted on by these armed gangs. So we launched yesterday our 2024 humanitarian response plan, and that was done then in the backdrop of this dramatic reality that I've outlined, and it's dramatic and it's extremely painful. And I would say it's absolutely disastrous for so many people in Haiti. But we launched the response plan with a financial envelope of $674 million, knowing that last year, despite, I think, a very important show of solidarity from the international community, we still only were able to achieve 34% of the financing need of last year. So obviously this year we insisted to say that, you know, the needs are greater, and hence the financial envelope is at the tune of 674 million, as I said. And we really count on a very robust mobilization of the international community. And of course, knowing that there are many tragic, unfortunately, situations that evolve around the world. Haiti is not the only crisis, but Haiti is passing through a moment. You can never compare one crisis with another. That's impossible. A human life is a human life. And in Haiti, too many human lives are actually being that suffer and that are lost in Haiti at the moment. And I would perhaps plea also particular eye on the children. We know that out of the 5.5 million that are in need of humanitarian assistance in Haiti, 3 million of those are children. And these are children that very often, and now we see a great number of schools that cannot open all the time. So it's very erratic. We have more or less, at some point we have 1,000 schools not open during the month of January. And that means a lot to children and a generation that have already seen impacts on their schooling as of COVID, and then it was the pay lock in 2019 and another one in 2022. So let's remember them. But this is a call for increased solidarity. Haiti needs it. It's going through one of the most critical moments in its recent history. And I would count on all you in the room to help us to really spread that message across and make sure that we get a response that is greater than last year, but at least that helps us to do the needed life-saving and the protection that we look forward to with our response plan. But also knowing, and that's my last point, that humanitarian assistance is not the solution. It is a needed action right now in order to save lives, decrease suffering, and also increase the protection and service to those that have been affected. But we need to invest in the root causes, and that needs to be done in parallel, and which is also something that we are putting a lot of effort into. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'll end here and ready for the questions.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. Let me start with Edith Lederer from AP.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. As Stephanie said, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First, just a follow-up question. Could you tell us how much the appeal was last year? And was it low? Can you tell me the figure?
Yes, I can tell you the figure. It was 720 million, so a little greater than this year.
And you said the needs are high. Why is the appeal lower?
Excuse me, can you repeat, Edith?
Yes. So last year was 720 million. This year is 674 million. But you said the needs are higher, so why is the appeal lower?
Well, it's a good question. And we have, in fact, what we have done is we've really tried to be much more targeted. We have learned from what we've seen work. We have a very, I would think, a very good cooperation with local organizations. So we try to see where can we add best value, and also how can we rely better on local organizations. So the whole agenda around localization is something that we put a lot of emphasis on. And so this is basically in that package. We've also seen, what is something that we can sort of, when you look at it from the spectrum of the cross-pillar cooperation between humanitarian and development and peace, how can we basically see that we can work across those to basically differentiate of where a response can come from. So it's in that sort of mathematical equation, if you wish, that we arrived at the figure of 674.
And could you tell us whether the security situation, especially with the gangs, is impacting whether and how humanitarian aid can be delivered? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Edith. And I think we've sort of alluded to that in previous conversations in this forum. There is, of course, that the gang violence impacts and impedes, it limits humanitarian access. Notwithstanding, we have an access. We've been, since I arrived at least in the country in July, I arrived in June 2022. In July, we started very specifically to strengthen our access group, which is a mixed access group between, let's say, the UN agencies and the local and international NGOs. And through that access group and the strategy that we worked up of basically trying to map the capital and other parts of the city or of the country, we've actually been able to find ways of achieving access. So we have access. It is it's not a given access. It's vulnerable, and there has to be continuous assessments before we do operations. But we have an access that we want to protect, but we need more in order for us to achieve our target. And that's, that sounds totally, but in order for us to be able to help people that are in need, we need a more safe and unimpeded access that is clear.
Maggie?
Oh.
Hi, Ms. Richardson. It's Margaret Bashir with Voice of America. My question to you is about the IPC reports in September that almost half the population was IPC 3 or IPC 4 levels of acute hunger. Where is it now? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Have you been able to help enough people to reduce the level of the emergency?
I think what we are seeing is that we don't have a new ICP yet, but what we could see, if you look at the trend, is that there are more people in acute need of food insecurity, or that more people in food insecure situation, right? But what we were able to do is to respond in such a way, and that is a proof also of our access, that we do have access, that we had some 20,000 people in IPC 5, you remember, this was in 2022, that we were able to address, so that we no longer have, in fact, people that are in that very dire, let's say, category. But yes, we have more people in food insecure situations in need of food assistance, and that is, of course, very fragile, because we also see that now the populations that are in IPC 3 can easily move into the IPC 4. We see, for example, an increased risk. We see increased numbers of malnutrition among children, and particularly pregnant women. And we also have done a foresight study in terms of what will the situation be in 2024. And there we see the risk of an increase in malnutrition. These are also indicators that could actually tell us that food insecurity will be a big priority for us as we move forward. And you will have seen also in the response plan that we have about 40% or actually 50% of the total appeal will go to assistance in terms of food security.
And could you just address how the closures of so many schools are impacting the children? Because I seem to recall there were school feeding programs when we visited. So with the kids not in school, they're missing meals. So I assume this contributes to it.
That's very true. And that's why it's so important that schools can remain open. The school feeding program is something that I find of extreme value, particularly as we combine it with local production, meaning you also do, there is an incentive for actually very local, economic activity. And even as we do that in the city, the aim to use local products is, of course, is much more emphasized now than previously. But to say that it is absolutely essential that the schools remain open for children to come to school, it's a sense of normality. There is a collective support that the school can provide that perhaps cannot be provided at home, and then it's the nutrition, of course, from the hot meat. So there is an impact, definitely, and we are doing everything we can to support the Ministry of Education to keep the schools open. And I must say that that's a constant effort, and there is quite a good, let's say, we see a good response. And we see now more and more schools being able to open as we speak, actually.
Let me go to Yvonne, then Michelle, and then we'll keep going.
Thank you, Yvonne Moriarty, News Ireland. I have two questions, if you don't mind. Firstly, you've described horrifying levels of sexual violence being carried out. This is something we've heard in UN reports frequently. My question is there any accountability for the perpetrators of these crimes, or are they just carrying it out with impunity at the moment? And my second question is with regard to the multinational force, the proposed deployment of this multinational force. What are the attitudes on the ground with regard to this deployment? Are people expecting it? Are they hoping for it? Do they even know that it's in the offing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, on sexual violence, much of this brutal sexual violence in terms of rape, collective rape, torture of women, that's very much, I would not be able to tell you a sort of a clear figure whether or not perpetrators, all of them go free. But many of them, because there is such a fear of retaliation. Because as I said, this happens very often in a neighborhood where people know each other and where the gangs have very clear, they know exactly where you live, where your family lives. So it's a lot of, it's very much also used in terms of, when you hold people hostage, negotiation. It's used as an arm to revenge between gangs. So I would say that fairly often, too often, the perpetrator goes free. That is something that we are, in fact, also now looking at in terms of setting up a special, but that's in very early stages. So I'm not going to go into any detail, but we are setting up special courts that have a special capacity to deal with these cases. And we are encouraging, and to the extent we can, support women to at least make a report so that once the judiciary becomes functional in that sense, we then have, we have elements to actually put cases forward. And then, so on the question on the MSS, you asked if what is the sentiment on the ground? The sentiment on the ground is like this: the country cannot continue. The level of violence that people are exposed to is inhuman. it cannot continue like this. If you would ask people on the street if they need assistance to deal with the gang violence, they would say yes.
Let me now go online. We have Jacqueline Charles from the Miami Herald. Let's see if we can hear. Jackie, are you able to turn your?
Yes, I'm there.
Fantastic.
Yes,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I have like a couple of questions. I know last year the appeal didn't really generate the kind of funding that we wanted. And so while launching this appeal, you're also launching an appeal for funding for the mission. And so I wanted to see if you can speak to, you know, your concerns or, you know, the possibility of having the international community actually step up. I mean, this is not a new challenge with Haiti, but everybody recognizes that the situation is dire, but we're not seeing the response as far as with donors. And the second question would be, last week there was a report about the rice that was being imported into Haiti and the high level of toxic metals. And I'm wondering whether or not the humanitarian sector of the UN is considering or taking that into account as far as, your food aid.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So on the first question, yes, the fund, these are two separate initiatives, right? And so from budgets of member states, here I'm speculating a bit, obviously, because we don't have the answer to this question, whether there is any, let's say, is there any contradiction between these two funding needs, if you wish? And so that's a bit of a speculation. But knowing sometimes how budgets are being, let's say, placed in capitals, I would imagine that they come from different pots of money, right? So I think on the contrary, what we can see is that there is an interest from donors, those who provide a support to the MSS, this non-UN multinational support mission to Haiti, in terms of financing for equipment, etc. They are also equally very interested and very engaged here on the ground in terms of humanitarian assistance, because they know that, in fact, we need to work on all fronts. And Jacqueline, we know that too, right? We need to work on all fronts in order to help and accompany this beautiful country to let's say, to get back on its track in terms of progress and a life in dignity. So I think that there is not a contradiction between these two. I think on the contrary, I think we could actually hope for a positive spillover in that sense. Now, coming to your question on the rights, I don't have an answer. I've seen a response to that report in terms saying that were questioning the results of that study. So far, I cannot give you any feedback on that. But of course, we are following very closely and reading what is being published. Thank you.
Let me come back to the room. Stefano has a question.
Thank you very much. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York. In Haiti, there's been now in the last at least 3 years, the demand for election and political election. Now, I understand you are you're doing humanitarian work there, but talking about the sentiment of the people, how do you feel the people there is considering this government that has been there legitimate? I mean, do they feel there is the time to change, to have election and change the government, or they don't think he's something important at the moment?
Well, I would say perhaps two things on this. Is that one thing is that people who are being forced to flee their homes, sleep on the street, not be able to go to school, not be able to go to the healthcare, not be able to put food in front of their children every day. I don't think that, this is not the priority for them, right? If I would be so blunt. So that's one thing, that there is a general agreement across the board that there is a need to encourage the engagement of all stakeholders in this process of preparing for elections, so that there can be elections at the end of the day that are free and that are transparent and as just as possible. So there's a general agreement across the board that is needed. Haiti needs to get back on its track towards with a democratic, let's say, process and full constitutionality.
Thank you. One final question, NPR.
Excuse me,
I'll
thank
take you
you, Linda Fasulo. I had a question about donors. Who are for example, the top 3 or top 5 donors, and what kinds of money are they providing? And secondly, which countries have withdrawn aid, have reduced their aid over the past year, or is it status quo?
Well, I would say that our most, let's say, in terms of figures, right, not proportional, but in terms of figures, contributions, it is the US, it's EU, and it's Canada. And so those are the most important in terms of contributions to our response plan. But there are many others. And in fact, I cannot, off my hat, say that we've had certainly no one that withdrew and decrease. I haven't seen, in fact, but don't quote me on that one, please. But to say that we have, in fact, we have new donors that are expressing interest, and what we are doing in order to facilitate smaller, let's say more modest contributions, but equally important, right, is to set up a regional pool fund that will actually be able to pool these a bit more modest amounts, so that we can actually, in fact, facilitate for member states who would like to demonstrate their solidarity in terms of contribution to the humanitarian response plan. So that's something that we're doing. So I would say I'm extremely grateful. And I know that, in fact, yes, we got 34 or 35% last year. Now, I know, and I don't like to compare things, but there are countries that receive less than that. So I would think that, okay, we need to do better. And we need to facilitate also for member states to be able to give perhaps more modest amounts. And that's what we are doing.
Let me now, final question to Benno.
Thank you so much for the briefing. Benno Schwingheimer with the German press agency. You told us already many figures and many numbers of how dire the situation is. But I wonder if you can also give us a personal eyewitness account of what you see every day. How difficult is it for you to move around in the country? What do you see? How do people get their hands on food and fuel? How's everyday life in Port-au-Prince?
I would say that I've seen things here that I've never seen in my life, and I've worked 30 years in the UN system. And it is the pain that a lot of women, children, men across the population are facing and subject to. The suffering and the pain is I would say is daunting. It's appalling. But it depends also where you live in the capital, right? So, on a Saturday, you would see that parts of the capital, people go in their car, they go to the supermarket and see what they can find, and then they go back home. Normally, we move around in armored vehicles as the UN personnel, myself, but I can move around in the capital. Sometimes it requires more security than other times. But what is quite daunting here is that you can't take the car and go freely to other parts of the country. And here I'm not talking about me or about us as the international community. In fact, the capital is in a way, being blocked because the national roads that go to the north and to the south, and also to the interior, these are actually very often controlled by the gangs. So either you are ready to pay a big price in terms of the monetary contribution, it's sort of like an official criminal tax, or you risk your life. And it also means that these roads, national roads, are not, they're not maintained, right? So movement of people and goods in this country has taken a big toll as a result of the gangs. But I can say that what I've witnessed here, and many with me, including Haitians, it goes beyond even what you could have feared in your worst nightmare.
Well, on this bleak note, thank you so much, Ulrika, for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And I will hand over to Stéphane, who will now go ahead with the regular noon briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.